Canadian literature and its landscape. Here we will see about the literature of Canada and the writers who are all inspired by the landscape of Canada and provide it in their works. Canadian literature in English can be tracked back to the early 17th century with Jacobin poetry in Newfoundland. The first literary journal, the Nova Scotia magazine, was published in Halifax in 1789. The History of Emily Montage in 1769 by English-born Francis Brooke is considered the first Canadian as well as the first North American novel, which written as a series of letters. It is based on Brooke's experiences living in the garrisons of Quebec in the 1760s. The novel provides the portrait of 18th century Canada while establishing a female literary voices early in English Canadian writing. Influenced by English poet Alexander Pope and French philosopher Voltaire, Brooke used the artificial conventions of the romance in her novel to talk of matters both fashionable and political. But the European colonization and its influence are emerged in early 1600s. Canadian literature is influenced by two major European languages like French and English. Many more languages are spoken by the people of Canada and produce their works towards the single national literature. Rather than commit themselves to the uniformity as the basis of their culture, Canadians instead accept plurality, that means diversity, as a workable alternative. On March 2023, 1752, printing in Canada was officially begun with the launch of the Halifax Gazette from the printing press of John Boschel, newly arrived from Boston. John Boschel took over the operation of Canada's first printing press in 1751. It was his daughter Elizabeth who worked in the printing press office of the Gazette newspaper, which with her father as both a compositor and the presswoman. As Canada's boundaries rapidly expanded, its settlements became widely scattered. This complicated transportation and communication, thereby impeding the distribution of goods, including books. Canada did not have a revolution as the United States did. Because of horizontal pools of Atlantic Ocean to the Britain and French, centers of publication long lay outside Canada. Under such circumstances, a sense of a separate Canadian literary identity was achieved only slowly and with sustained effort. Canadian literature often emphasized the landscape, portraying it as both a physical and symbolic element that shapes the nation's identity, history, and cultural narratives. The vast, diverse geography of Canada, spanning from rugged coast and icy tundras to dense forest and agricultural lands, provide a rich background for literary works. By the 1960s, the Canadian literary scene had blossomed. More volumes of poetry, fiction, drama, and critical studies were appeared in this 20th century. Most Canadian literature is written in English or French, and also other languages includes Gaelic, German, Icelandic, Ukrainian, Yiddish, and the languages of original Canadians like Cree, Haida, Inuktitut, and Ojibwa. The landscape and literature of Canada influence the themes of identity and nationalism, colonialism and indigenous preservatives, survival and isolation, romanticization and sublime beauty. Here, the identity and nationalism. Canadian literature often reflects the deep connection between the lands and national identities. Writers like Margaret Atwood and Michael Ontage explores how the untamed wilderness and expansive geography have shaped the Canadian psyche. The challenges of surviving in harsh conditions, adapting to diverse climates, and coexisting with nature often symbolize reliance and perseverance. Colonialism and indigenous perspectives. The landscape in Canadian literature also serves as the canvas for examining colonial histories and their impact on indigenous communities. Indigenous writers like Thomas King, Maria Campbell, and Eden Robinson often portrayed the land as scared, emphasizing themes of stewardship, displacement, and recolonization with nature. The clash between shelter narratives and indigenous worldviews is the recurring theme. Survival and isolation. The wilderness in Canadian literature is frequently a site of struggle, forcing characters in confront their limits and morality. Works like Susanna Moody's Roughing It in the Bush and Margaret Lawrence novels highlights themes of survival, isolation, and self-discovery within the vast, untamed landscapes. Romanticization and sublime beauty. Many Canadian poets and writers romanticize the landscape, celebrating its sublime beauty. This is evident in the works of the poets like A.I. Pody and early Birney, who describe the vastness of the Canadian environment with awe and reverence. The idea of the landscape as the source of inspiration, solace, and artistic reflection and prevalent. We can take the poem Green Rain by Dorothy Livesey as example for romanticization and sublime beauty of Canadian literature. Here, the Dorothy Livesey describes the beautiness of the places that she lives in her childhood. Regionalism and specific landscape. Regional differences plays a major role in shaping the theme and tone of Canadian literature. Writers from the Atlantic province like Lucy in Anne of Green Gables highlights coastal life, small towns, and a sense of belongings. The prairies often depict the theme of openness, hardship, and agricultural life that leads by the people as seen in the works of W.O. Mitchell. The North offer a stark portrayal of isolation and natural beauty, with authors like Fairey Mowat capturing its raw essence. Urban landscapes in cities like Toronto or Vancouver contrast with rural and wilderness settings, reflecting themes of modernization and alienation. The British loyalists of Northern American colonies, starting in 1775, wrote tributes to the British monarchy and satires of the American beliefs in republican government. Loyalist writing such as Jonathan Odell's works The American Times 1780, a series of satiric verse about the leaders of the American Revolution, such as Abraham Lincoln, that leads to the writings of revolutionists like Walt Whitman and their community. This tradition came to dominate Canada English language intellectual history. Before 1800, the writings and writers of Canada are mostly travelers and explorers such as Henry Kelsey, Samuel Herne, and Sir Alexander Mackenzie. During 19th century, Canadian writers grew and numerous and more ambitious, attempting new forms and addressing new subjects. At first, writers turned to narratives that recorded exploration, settlement, and survival. In the end of the century, the themes get numerous, like social issues of day-to-day life, politics of independence, the rights to women, historical romance, comedy of manners, lyric poetry. Here, the poets and the lyric poetry is more influenced by the nature. Their themes are all about the transcendence of nature. Some famous writers of 19th century are Oliver Goldsmith, Charles Sangster, Charles Mayer, Levi Adams. The Rising Village, the poem by Oliver Goldsmith, Canadian writer, is eventually compared with the poem Deserted Village that written by the Irish writer Oliver Goldsmith. So these writers they are inspired by the 18th century British romantic poets and writers. And their major themes are all focused on the nature. And also we have the Confederation group of poets who are all born in 1860s, and their major theme is focused on indigenous people and their culture and how they lived in the Canadian atmosphere. The Confederation poets were strongly influenced by the British Romantics, mainly Wordsworth and Shelley. Some of the Confederation group poets are Wilford Campbell, Lampman, Duncan Campbell Scott, Charles Bills Common. Many of their poems deals with outside of the theme of indigenous culture. So the overall view of Canadian literature is concentrated to the landscape more than their culture and tradition.